But we still need to get into gender ideology, and I think gender ideology, it is more, it is almost like abortion in a sense, where there's no sort of middle ground there, because with gender ideology, it's essentially reality versus non-reality in some certain sense. What do you think about that, Emmett?
I'm going to advocate, I'm going to give a disclaimer as well. I have not seen gender ideology as pervasive as critical race theory
That
under
is
any
true.
condition.
Yes, that is true.
Critical race theory is the main problem. Now, the gender ideology
It's
thing,
more
I
cultural
believe
gender ideology.
it is more
At least that's in my opinion. I've seen
it
it like
depends
in
on
social media, but not in the classroom. Like, go on.
it depends on the teacher as well. I mean, some
Yeah.
teachers will just go, but most will not. And I do not see as many administrations enforcing gender ideology. Now, we can apply the same logic to gender ideology as we did to critical race theory and say it's one way of looking at things. And that should be introduced in the classroom along with other ways of looking at things.
Well, I don't know about that. Let me push back on you a bit on that, because if classical liberalism is a value, then on a metaphysical level, reality and science is, and adherent to science to know the world around us is another value that we uphold as citizens. And so I looking having gender ideology as one way of looking at things, I don't think, just as we wouldn't say, okay, enlightenment rationalism, or you can look at things as truth but power. I think that maybe if you talk about expressive individualism as maybe something in your elective, and an outgrowth of that being gender ideology, where you think that the expression of the individual is above the reality in which the individual lives in, and maybe you teach that in a philosophy class or whatnot, maybe. But to teach gender ideology and say, well, you could have male and female, or you could look at this in that way. I don't think it applies the same exact way.
Well, let me introduce something else. So I have spoken to many students across Northeast at a bunch of different schools. And one of the points I feel like I have to emphasize more is that there are disciplines where debate is not acceptable. Um, and that's math and science. If we're talking about a secular objective education, you cannot disagree with the Pythagorean theorem. If you want to disagree with your teacher who says, let's look at math through a racial lens, that's bringing humanities in, and that can be disagreed with. But if you're talking about biology and the teacher says, these are the facts about sex and gender and things like that, then it would be inappropriate to for the teacher to bring in this opposing viewpoint, because that's obstructing the student's conception of what the scientific consensus is around that. But if you're in a philosophy course and humanities course, I would say bring it in, because that's a different way of
Interesting.
looking at something. It's if you're talking to different people, they would interpret it in different ways, and it's not as attractive as you may think among the student body. um, there are fact classes and there are debate classes in my sense, and of course there are more nuances. But the idea of gender ideology has many different subsections to it. So that was an interesting point you made.
Yeah, I find it interesting, and I want to get sort of the student attitude. Which do you think the students will reject more, critical race theory or gender ideology, and why?
It depends when it's brought up. If you bring up
Interesting.
critical race theory in high school, their minds are more developed. And if you bring it up among other viewpoints, they're going to say, no, I don't want to make myself feel bad and call other people racist, like all this stuff. I would rather prefer an equal and more respectful.
Yeah, I've
Um,
seen that as well. Yes.
that happens a lot. So it depends where you bring it up. I think gender ideology is more pervasive because one of the parts of the ideology is that you can, really change what you are. And we haven't seen many, many racial, but, changes. It's not a trend for someone to just come out as a different race. So I'd say that the gender ideology is more attractive to students, which is a good thing because I believe a critical race theory is more dangerous.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Interesting. All right, we're gonna get into that. Why do you think critical race theory is more dangerous than gender ideology? Because I haven't ranked it in my head. I haven't sat down and thought, well, this is more dangerous than this. But I sort of want to get into that conversation. So we'll get into that. But I want to share my thoughts. That's a very interesting point. And it goes to this: what scale are you? Where on a scale are you when it comes to tolerance, right? Because I would say that, especially people in our generation, the tolerance level is all the way here. And, we could talk about tolerance as a virtue. How much should we be tolerating? Are there certain things in society should we not be tolerating? But because their tolerance level is all the way to, I pretty much tolerate anything, then CRT, when you explain CRT is like racial essentialism, let's just tolerate other people. Let's not demonize white people for this. Let's not bring down black people and make them disappointed because of this. As a tolerance issue, they'll reject CRT, but also as a tolerance issue, they will accept gender ideology. And so a major question in this is, has tolerance gone too far? In a sense where, okay, like tolerance has helped us in a sense where if we explain CRT in a proper way, students will reject CRT, but the tolerance meter has gone so far that they're also going to accept expressive individualism and coddle people, even though their views requires us to reject reality as it is.
I would agree with much of what you said. On the idea of training our youth of our country, we need to instill them with certain ideas that are more or less unique to developed nations, which is this idea of self-sufficiency, personal responsibility, and almost realizing American exceptionalism and realizing their tremendous luck they have growing up in a Western nation, not teaching them to think of themselves as a victim and of that suddenly we need to tear down all these institutions which make up our entire country and civilization because they believe in the conspiracy theory that it's rooted in some sort of systemic racism. And there's debates over that topic. I don't want to call it, just dismiss it wholeheartedly. But as a short-term problem, I see CRT as more dangerous to the fabric of our country. And gender ideology, I see it as what you said, more tolerance than
like a fundamental, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think that gender ideology on a metaphysical level rather than because I agree with you that CRT has an epistemological and a metaphysical level. CRT is an endangerment to our country, philosophically speaking, and then on a political level, on almost every single level, it's a threat to our country. But gender ideology, yes, it is a thing about tolerance. So it's a question about our values and how high should tolerance be on the hierarchy. But it's also a question of, or it is also threatening to our way of life in the sense that it takes a piss on the metaphysical value hierarchy that we have in the West, where reality, truth, is number one, and we are just the subjects, right? We're not we are just, or I would say truth is top dog, and we are from maybe a morality standpoint, when we talk about Christianity and that truth being God, us like trying to find that, or from a metaphysical level where reality just exists, and we use our abilities to see, to hear, and whatnot to start painting that picture and understand more. From an epistemological level, communication, you know this, I know this, it clash, we get closer to the truth. I think on a level, gender ideology, on a metaphysical level, on a metaphysical level and on a moral level, on a morality level, it is oppositional to the pre-existing order. But I do believe, but yeah, CRT threatens all those things, like all those things plus epistemology and whatnot. And so, yeah, so maybe you're right. CRT is more dangerous from just like a strictly like philosophical level. Like if we're just like looking at, okay, what are the major tenets of Western civilization, and how many of CRT tenets and gender ideology tenets are like oppositional to those? CRT has more, but yeah, CRT has more. I agree with you there. But do you think tolerance being above the truth, isn't that gravely dangerous as well?
I would say that the truth should be prioritized and any attempts to blur the lines between truth and reality should be taken very seriously. But something to point out, our whole civilization is, if you're taking a postmodern perspective or even just a factual perspective, our civilization is based on delusions. And
Okay.
I'm saying
Continue.
being careful because we base ourselves on civilization has developed money, different types of trust and corporations, which governments, nations, these are things that were
Faith-based,
developed
yeah.
by humans to civilize themselves, and we have developed religions and moral ethical codes to help our broader society function collectively, and those things change. So with the critical race theory, it implied you're the problem and we need to destroy everything that has helped you achieve your standard of living because it's rooted in some sort of racism. But the gender ideology, if someone wants to tell me that whatever gender theory they have that isn't consistent with science, I don't care. I mean, they're not really doing anything for me unless they're forcing me to do anything about it. They're not tearing down the base the tenets of our civilization that I believe need to be there, like critical race theory is. It's like, yes, this is crazy, and in a lot of cases we've seen there are some good parts and there are some really bad parts, but one of the virtues of American society is you can be wrong, and you can not be limited in what you say, and it's not a problem of free expression. And I know we're talking about incorporating that into the schools, but when you incorporate it in the schools, that's a different nuance. But in terms of culture, I don't see it as big of a threat because they can function in our regular systems and have this internal, you can call it a delusion if you want, but that's a little bit of a connotated word.
Yeah, no, I get it. So you're sort of saying that gender ideology sort of a delusion among other delusions that are a bit more important for our society to function. But in the grand scheme of CRT is not a delusion. It is a completely oppositional moral
Action.
code. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a completely oppositional moral code, and that needs to be eradicated first. And then we can start taking like dealing with the more petty delusions, the elitist sort of. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that, and it's harder for ordinary Americans to sort of agree. Like ordinary Americans are more likely to agree with CRT than to agree with gender ideology. CRT is more white; it's easier to spread.
And the truth is always changing, and I must give credit to the postmodernists and the people that are trying to advance certain things, because they're right in a certain to a certain degree, that we're constantly finding new things about our own human bodies and our own civilizations and our own life. We should not adhere and only accept the truths of today, because that will most definitely be different from the truths of tomorrow. Now, it depends on how radical you want to go with that, and whether you think that's a good idea or not, or how many institutions you believe are based on this reality that exists today. But I don't see it as a direct threat.
Okay,